So let's stay on the story and bring in Gaëlle Rivard Piché in Ottawa. She is the Executive Director of the Conference of Defence Associations and the CDA Institute. Gaëlle, thank you for taking the time. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Andrew, for inviting me.
So what stood out to you from the Prime Minister's remarks there when he was questioned by reporters?
Well, I think we need to start by acknowledging how remarkable this announcement is. I think it's a historical moment for defense. This is something that was long awaited. And it's going to be very interesting to see how things plays out as we move forward. But it is definitely a very strong signal that that the government is sending to both Canadians and our allies, our partners and allies internationally.
Were you somewhat surprised by this? I mean, this was not talked about in the election campaign in terms of the speed with which we would reach that 2% threshold. To say that this is literally going to happen, he's committing to this happening within months, within this fiscal year, to go from below 1.4% of GDP up to 2%, which is a commitment of $9.3 billion more in defense spending. I mean, that is a lot of money very fast.
Yes, definitely. I think we're at a very we're at a moment where things are evolving very quickly. I started with the election of Donald Trump, and then from January 2025, it became quite clear that Canada would have to step up. And I think as things are evolving, we are going to see a little bit more, we're going to see more commitment. And this is what we're seeing with this announcement today. Canada needs to be able, needs to be able to defend itself, but also and to stand and be credible next to its allies. And we are at a very unique moment where economic security is now aligned with our national defense, and where national defense can actually contribute to the Canadian economy, to our economic security, while the development of our economy can also contribute to national defense. And I think this is a very unique moment in Canadian history.
I was interested in a question from one of my colleagues, the CBC's Jamie Strachan, who said, is it possible for the government to spend this much money so quickly? And the Prime Minister's response was along the lines that it'll go towards some of the basics, such as proper pay, benefits, housing, munitions, that will be kind of the first, that's how you kind of get the money out quickly out the door to kind of reach the threshold, and saying that this needs to happen, that the Canadian military personnel, they need to be paid better.
Yes, well, I think we all have questions about how this is going to be delivered, but it is positive to me that a lot of this investment is going to go towards addressing the consequences of chronic underfunding for years, if not decades, in the Canadian Armed Forces. I think the members of the Canadian Armed Forces and their families should benefit from those investments, and this is what we've been hearing through. And I think by increasing access to services, support to our armed forces and their family, as well as increasing salary, this is going to help to solve the issue of recruitment, but also retention in the Canadian Armed Forces moving forward. And I think just getting us back to a baseline where we are at a proper level of readiness, proper level of training, and addressing all those weaknesses that have been pointed out in different reports over the years is a good way to start. After that, as I said, it's going to be about delivery, and the devil is really in the details. We're going to see how this new procurement agency actually departs from the hurdles that have been undermining procurement over the years. But it's going to be interesting to see how things goes. But I think the signal is quite strong from the Prime Minister.
I'm wondering what you make of this signal to the United States, because on the one hand, we heard the Prime Minister in those remarks to reporters, he said in some ways that our alliance or our closeness to the United States will be enhanced or even closer. There will be closer cooperation when it comes to, for instance, ballistic missile defense and NORAD. But then he also talked about how, rising great powers, this was in the speech earlier, rising great powers are now in strategic competition with America. New imperialism threatens. Middle powers compete for interests and attention, knowing that if they are not at the table, they will be on the menu. So there's an interesting line here where it says, in some ways, we're getting closer to the United States, but in other ways, we're going to be pulling further away. and almost implying, I think, well, you tell me if you agree, that the United States does pose a threat to Canada.
I think to me, what is really important in the statement is the fact that it's not necessarily, it's increasing spending to reduce dependency on our allies, but also because this also makes us a more credible allies in the eyes of the United States. And so if we invest in our own national security and national defense, if we're able to ensure our sovereignty, to defend ourselves against threat across the spectrum, right, from whether we're talking hybrid threats in the cybersecurity threat, or in space, if we're able to bring unique capabilities and savoir-faire to the United States, then we're more credible. And I think this is just going to reinforce the alliance. But historically, Canada has had, hasn't necessarily contributed to the extent that it should to the alliance with the US. And I think by increasing our military spending, we're just becoming a more credible ally in the eyes of Washington. And it's the same thing with NATO. I think it's about positioning ourselves and signaling to our allies that we're ready and we'll be able to defend ourselves, but also contribute significantly to our different alliances.
Was there anything in this announcement that really stood out to you in terms of where the money is going to go? I mean, he kind of brought up some sort of embarrassing examples. One that kind of stood out to me is that this country has one operational submarine. Imagine the country with the longest coastline in the world having one operational submarine.
What stood out to me is that most of the money is going to be invested right now, right away on critical issues within that are affecting the Canadian Armed Forces. However, I will look and wait to hear more about how it's going to be invested in supporting more long-term defense procurement project, like you said, like the submarines, as well as what the decision is going to be on the F-35. Because I think there's also this balance between, yes, we want to invest in the Canadian economy, we want to develop the Canadian industry, but there's also the reality that we need to be interoperable with our allies, starting with the United States as well as with NATO allies. And so it's going to be about balancing the requirements between our sovereignty, those investments in the long term, and the requirements of our alliances.
So you, very quickly, since you mentioned F-35s, where do you think, did you get anything from the Prime Minister today in terms of whether or not, where Canada is leaning, whether to go with an American fighter jet or to go with a European fighter jet or South Korean or elsewhere?
I did not, but we have to realize that if we're going to have different types of aircraft, different types of fighters, it increases the burden on our military when it comes to personnel, training, maintenance, infrastructure, and so on. And so this is also the position where, short-term political considerations also need to be balanced with the requirements of long-term procurement processes like fighter jets.
Gaëlle, really good to talk to you. Thank you, Gaëlle Rivard Piché of the Conference of Defense Associations in Ottawa.
Thank you.